Welcome back to the shop, guys. In the last video, we conducted extensive testing of the stock LS2 air filter intake assembly with the goal of determining whether or not it's restrictive or not. In my opinion, the two main takeaways from that testing are as follows. Number one, the stock LS2 air filter assembly contains filters that are large enough with plenty of surface area, and the stock paper filters are efficient enough that they do not cause any material drop in pressure to the intake manifold, and that is evidenced by the testing we did with the stock air filter assembly both with and without the air filters in place. Takeaway number two is that at wide open throttle, 6,000 RPMs, there is in fact a 1/2 pound per square inch pressure drop inside the intake manifold. Take a look at the various pressure drops at different RPMs at wide open throttle right here. And that brings us to today's video, and the purpose is to, number one, try to determine where that 1/2 pound per square inch of pressure drop is coming from. Number two, roughly how much horsepower might that be costing us? And number three, what would it cost to reduce that restriction, and is it worth it? As mentioned, we did determine that the stock paper filters are not the source of the restriction, so that leaves us with four possible causes as to where the restriction could be coming from. Possibility number one, as the C6 is going through the air, perhaps because of the aerodynamics and whatnot around and under the car, it's creating a pressure drop inside the engine bay, which is of course where the air filter resides. If this is true at speed, the engine bay could potentially be at about 1/2 pound below ambient air pressure. To test for this, I already have some good data from my buddy's C6 Z06 from last summer at the drag strip. And basically what I'm looking at is at 5,400 RPMs in first, second, third, and fourth, what is the manifold absolute pressure at each one of those data points? And if the pressure is actually dropping at speed in the engine bay, we should see the pressure drop in his manifold absolute pressure at each specific data point. And as we can see, there is no difference, so I'm going to rule out a pressure drop under the hood at speed as being a potential cause of our 1/2 pound per square inch pressure drop. The next possible source of restriction would probably be the air filter assembly itself, and I don't have any readily available tools or ways to test for this specifically, but observationally, take a look at this. Let me quickly remove the entire air filter assembly, including the mass airflow sensor, from the C6 and bring it to the bench. These are the openings in the air bridge where the passenger side and the driver's side individual air filter boxes attach. Look at the size of those holes compared to the size of each hole if you divide the mass airflow sensor in half. And as you can see, if there's a restriction in either the airbox assembly or the mass airflow sensor, it seems pretty clear to me that the mass airflow sensor would be the obvious culprit. Additionally, the mass airflow sensor has what looks like a screen on one side. This is actually to straighten out the airflow to give this style of a mass airflow sensor a more accurate reading. And on the back side, we've got this vane. Both the vane and the filter screen obviously take up some space, which collectively could further add to the restriction. Let's take a peek at the throttle body. Specifically, what is its diameter? It has an opening of 3 3/4 inches, but as you can see, it's pretty clear that it tapers down to a smaller diameter, so let's measure the inner diameter, which is what really matters. Lo and behold, it tapers down to 3.5 inches, which is the same diameter as the mass airflow sensor. Or is it? Taking a closer look at the mass airflow sensor, and it wasn't obvious the first time, but it tapers down as well. And as it turns out, after careful further measurement, the inner diameter is 3 1/4 inches, which is smaller than the throttle body. Furthermore, the throttle body does not have the airflow straightener insert like the mass airflow sensor has, so I am now completely satisfied that the most restrictive part of the intake track on the LS2 Powered Corvette is the mass airflow sensor. Well, as you saw, all of the evidence is pointing right at the mass airflow sensor as being our culprit. So how much horsepower is 1/2 pound per square inch of atmospheric pressure inside the intake manifold costing us, and what can we do about it? Now, admittedly, it is pretty difficult to tell exactly how much horsepower is being lost, but with some quick and dirty math, as well as me taking a few liberties as far as assumptions go, here's what I come up with. We do know that the LS2 does make 400 horsepower, and we also know that the atmospheric pressure where I live is about 14.36 pounds per square inch. Now, if you take 400 horsepower and divide it by the atmospheric pressure, you get about 28 horsepower per pound of atmospheric pressure. And yes, atmospheric pressure is absolutely related to how much horsepower an engine makes, because after all, it's the atmospheric pressure that pushes the air into the engine exactly the same way as a supercharger does or a turbo. So if we can all agree that 28 horsepower per pound per square inch of atmospheric pressure is a good rough estimate, then the half a pound per square inch of atmospheric pressure that we lost inside the intake manifold is worth roughly 14 horsepower. Now, I don't expect to completely eliminate the pressure drop inside the LS2 intake manifold, but if we can reduce it by 70%, that should equate to pretty close to around 10 horsepower. 10 horsepower is not a tremendous amount, but if we are effectively able to reduce the intake manifold pressure drop by 70%, that will also pay dividends for mods down the road, such as a performance intake manifold, a performance camshaft, and of course, a set of headers. Now, I've been studying the intake situations on all the LS engines, and I've come across a few interesting facts. First, the LS1 and LS6 engines used a 78mm throttle body. The 6-liter LS2 and the 6.2-liter LS3 both came with 90mm throttle bodies, and interestingly enough, the 7-liter LS7 engine that came in the C6 Z06 and revs to 7,000 RPMs also came with a 90mm throttle body. What's super interesting to me is that for the LS3 and the LS7 C6 Corvettes, GM scrapped the entire air filter intake assembly, including the 85mm mass airflow sensor. For the new air filter intake system, GM fitted it with a slide-in style mass airflow sensor, and as you can see, it's much less restrictive than the 85mm housing that the LS2 mass airflow sensor has to live in. While GM was at it, they also engineered the air filter assembly so that it grabs its air from down lower in the front of the C6's engine bay, and it's my understanding that GM also fitted it with a better air filter element to take care of the breathing needs of the LS3 and the mighty LS7. Collectively, these changes pretty much address all of the concerns that I have with the stock LS2 air filter assembly. So now for the million-dollar question, what am I going to do, if anything, to improve the ability of my LS2 Powered C6 to breathe? Well, parts have been ordered, and I hope to have the answer for you in the next video. Guys, if you got any value out of this video, please hit that thumbs up below, but most importantly, thanks for watching.